ga je beginnen met een introductie van Ellen. I'll do this in Dutch if you don't mind, Ellen. But it's only good things, I promise. Ellen Moore is directeur en oprichter van SMLXL, maar eigenlijk staat het voor Small, Medium Large Xtralarge. Dat is een lekkere, korte, pakkende naam. Een crossmediaal marketingbureau in Cambridge en Londen. Hij heeft 17 jaar ervaring als creatieve merkstrateeg in de reclame-industrie. And how do I pronounce it, Ellen, again? Because you told me yesterday, but I still... The name of your company, do I say SMLXL? Yeah. Smoksel. Bij Smoksel is hij gespecialiseerd in nieuwsmedia, broadcasting, mobiele, telecom en fast movers. Werkt voor de grote merken. Hij is ook mede-auteur van het boek Communities Dominate Brands. En hoe we deze sessie gaan doen is dat Ellen geeft een presentatie van ongeveer een half uurtje. Nou, daarna valt hij ongeveer flauw omdat het hier 50 graden op het podium is. Als hij dat niet doet, interviewt hij ook nog Lucas Kadowski, die jongen van Spreadshirt uit Leipzig, die dat hele grappige bedrijf is begonnen, waarmee je iedereen ter wereld kan t-shirts ontwikkelen en bedenken, via hem laten maken en overal verkopen. Dus hij is een soort outsourced t-shirt maker. Erg grappig. Dat is de inhoud even heel kort van de sessie, voor hoe het procedureel gaat. Waar het om gaat is de rol van communities en het belang van het engagement van klanten. En de manier waarop je met co-creation nieuwe dingen kan maken. Met name de t-shirt eigenlijk van Lucas. Het grappige is dat dus Ellen heeft geschreven over iets wat Lucas dan ook nog echt maakt. En het belangrijkste is eigenlijk dat we hopen wat te leren van een nieuwe vorm van e-commerce. Een hele nieuwe generatie, juist na het traditionele oude model. Wat Amazon vroeger deed en nu blijkbaar, gezien de vorige sessie, ook aan het verlaten is. Dus het gaat nu weer om samenwerken en samen de klant bedienen. So the word is to you, Ellen. All yours.
Good morning. Is the microphone too? The campfire of the old broadcast TV set, our old world. I can't imagine many families are doing this today. On the left-hand side is an image of the store American Apparel, which opened up its first store in Second Life a few months ago and created a lot of interest. What I want to talk about is the fact that we live in a digital network society, and it fundamentally changes the way that we create business, the way that we create culture, the way that we share information, and how we talk to each other. And so in many ways, sort of after sort of the work that we've been doing and the writing of the book, we've certainly come to a point where we believe that communities now definitely are kind of in a more dominant position. And in fact, this is the storming of the Bastille. And what we say is once you storm the Bastille, you don't go back to your day job. And your day job in this instance is the consumer that is passive, uninformed, unconnected, who will just consume the stuff that is pushed out at them. That no longer applies in this world. It's the end of the read-only culture, and it's the end of information feudalism. And of course, there are many big companies out there today which are trying extremely hard to stop that change in many ways. It doesn't matter whether it's Sony with their sort of DRM, Apple sort of trying to lock people in with their DRM, BT in the UK have built a great big multimedia mobile phone video on demand thing, but it's all been locked in to BT. And what we see, and it's one of the reasons why Lucas and I are going to have a chat afterwards, is actually Lucas's business model for Spreadshirt and the way he builds it is absolutely to do with this new paradigm shift. I didn't say this, but a guy called C.K. Prahalad did. If companies spent the 20th century managing experiences, then they must spend the 21st century managing efficiencies. They must spend the 21st century managing experiences. You think about Henry T. Ford, he kind of created one of the most efficient industrial machines. And in many ways, our industrial world, and the lives that we all lead have benefited by that. But the picture on the far side there is called the robo-arm. And we've gone into a very different world about how we're using technology and experiences. After our book came out, we wondered whether we'd gone a little bit too far. In fact, really what I'm saying today is not cutting edge as it was last year, it's mainstream. But The Economist wrote this in a big article, and they say many firms do not seem aware of the revolutionary implications of newly empowered consumers. Only those firms ready and able to serve those customers will survive. That's a pretty heavy statement, you know. So let's talk about Darwin. It was Darwin who said actually that it's not the strongest or the most intelligent that will survive, but those most adaptive to change. And we've arrived at a point, I think, where business models, culture, the way we use information, we share information, the way that we're creating things, we are at a point of change where we have to really think about adaptation. But there was actually something else that Darwin thought about, because he couldn't really work it out. He thought, well, there's this funny bird called a peacock, and it's got these funny little legs, and it's got these silly little wings, and, you know, how on earth does the peacock manage to survive? Well, the word was attraction. The peacock could attract that peahen, and she would kind of look at it and look at that peacock, and she'd say, he's got to have something going for him, right? Because he looks so fantastic. As a consequence of that, I think the nature of brands are changing. We've got to think about how we're going to attract our customers and how we're going to keep them. So I would say or argue that we've got three categories. Brands that are life-simplifying, life-enabling, or perhaps even navigational. I mean, let's think about Google. You know, think about the constant innovations and the wonderful things that we saw this morning, but it doesn't cost me a penny to use it, but it's a billion-dollar company. Now, I want to talk at the very heart of the sort of social implications of our book, and this sort of goes to do with why communities and why, again, companies like Lucas's are thriving. Bottom sort of corner there, on the left-hand side, no, your right-hand side, we grew up in communities, and our identities were formed and shaped by the religion of the time, whether my father was a blacksmith, where I actually came from, working on arable land. It's a very different way that our identities were formed and shaped. As we moved into an industrial world, we start to kind of get the nuclear family, and we start to get migration of people into cities out of urban areas. Now, this is a sort of a point where I want to sort of jump forward, because I could talk a lot about this for a long time, but essentially what's starting to happen is that our identities are starting to break down and starting to change. In the modern world, after 1945, the way that it was decided that we would rebuild our economies was through mass consumption. And to do that, we needed a mass media. In many ways, you know, the American dream is all about the consumption of that. And in many ways, that sort of worked, because by the 60s, if you think about it, you know, we had an explosion in art, an explosion in fashion, the creative industries, but we also had things like the hippie counterculture, the Vietnam protests, the Paris riots. Because actually, for the first time, what we were doing was to start to think about the self and who was I? As, in a way, we started to challenge the traditional states and organisations that previously had been fundamental to the way that we led our lives. Go back to 1950s TV advertising. This is what a man did. This is what a woman did. This is what your sons did. This is what your children's did. You know, it's a very different world to the world we live in today. When we get into the world we are now, in a postmodern world, the fact is we can have multiple personalities. Think about the avatars in Second Life. You know, and it changes everything. And what happens is then, is that people say to me, but Alan, this is a paradox. On the one hand, you're talking about highly individualized people, where identity becomes actually the kind of core of what they want to become or to search or to find out or to build. But you talk about communities, and I say, right, that's because we are a we species by design. Human beings have a fundamental need to connect and to communicate. We are deeply social. Our DNA is for us to be deeply social. We're not changing into Borgs. What technology is doing for the first time in 50 years is allow us to get back to the conversations that we had before mass consumer or mass consumption, mass media. If you think about it, the oral culture, the telling of stories passed down is now where YouTube is now playing that role, or myspace.com, or whatever it is, because we can get back to a traditional notion of living a kind of a world where we are shaping and changing that culture. There's a lady called Shoshana Zuboff that wrote a book called The Support Economy. If you haven't read it, I urge that you do. It's certainly changed a lot about the way that I thought about things. She talks about psychological self-determination, and this is this whole thing about identity again. And if you think about it, if we're sort of really looking for the consumption of things that create meaning to us, we're going to look to those communities where we are going to feel most at home and belong to. And we'll talk about some principal trends about sort of what's happening in sort of media and marketing and business and why we need to think about these things. Well, back to Google. We now live in a sort of pull culture. Search changed everything. My son Joseph, who's 8, will only ever know a world where he can actually search for whatever he wants when he wants it. We can't push messaging out to people in the way that we once did. We don't want to be pushed stuff. In fact, I was sitting here waiting to give this speech, and my daughter texted me on the phone, and she said, "Dad, I've got this company. They keep ringing me, trying to sell me stuff. What should I do?" I said, "Tell them to fuck off, and I'll call the police." We don't want it. We don't want those interruptions. And in many times, sort of prime time is no longer a time of day. It's a state of mind. The BBC in the UK are briefing senior managers that within 6 years, the schedule, as we know it, the TV schedule, will not exist. And we are curating our own consumption. Again, if you think about it, you know, if I'm really into these funny little toys that we got up here, I can get as many as I want. I've got richness and I've got reach. I can go onto eBay. I can join community sites, you know, and I can edit out all the things that I don't want. We live in a hot media world now, not a cold media world. So again, Amazon, eBay, wikis, blogs, Wikipedia, for example. When we had the July the 7th bombings in the UK last year, that page was updated 2,800 times in 24 hours. That is hot media. The information flows are massive. Cold media, old business models, not thinking about the social aspects of what you're doing. How do you kind of get that community to come together? How do you kind of co-create value in completely different ways? Another example, very quickly, is Jamie Oliver. He ran a program in the UK called School Dinners, where he said what we feed our kids is rubbish in schools. We're on a fatty diet, we've got obesity problems, we've got health problems. He created a program called Jamie's School Dinners. Now that would have been cold media if he didn't then do the following, which was set up a blog site and a website specifically for people to go on and have a discussion and have forums. What he delivered was 300,000 digital signatures to Tony Blair's government, which said, this is what people think. And a consequence of that, major companies started to really have serious profit problems, and one went out of business because the government realised now there were people standing up collectively around an issue and saying, we don't want this anymore. The BBC understand that actually now we have to live in a network world, not a broadcast world. They have to think very differently about how we get that information and use that information. And so, for example, here I can go onto the BBC website and I can listen to it now, or I can download it, or I can podcast it. And they're working on many, many innovative things at the moment where they understand that they've got to recreate value to survive. We're moving from mass media to social media. I'm sure you've all heard of the Arctic Monkeys, got to #1 in the UK without a record company. And there's many that are coming along with things like MySpace and YouTube and the blogs, and I mean, it just changes. And what the problem is that marketeers and businesses and companies are still in this mindset of, okay, so last year we sort of, you know, made 100,000 widgets or 1 million widgets. We marketed this much. Well, next year we need to increase that by 20%. We need to increase our marketing budget by this. It's completely a misunderstanding about how value is going to be created in the future. And there's this whole notion about the professional amateur or the pro-am. After sort of speaking to Lucas about his company, I went and kind of had a look at sort of what was going online in terms of sort of the creation of just T-shirts. And there are a number of interesting companies. The quality of the work is outstanding. It's better than anything you would find in most retail stores. Think about when I was a kid, I'm 42 years of age, we had one camera, and I wasn't allowed to use it because I wasn't professional enough. I didn't have the competency. Yet with my camera now, I can take pictures, I can take video, I can upload it. People are programming, people are using software programs. You know, we are all very highly skilled creatively in a way that we weren't before. And so it's sort of back to, you know, MySpace, and here we got Lily Allen, and again, which was a really big hit. You know, we can all upload our content. We can all be part of a bigger narrative, a bigger story, but it changes the nature of cultural production and it changes the economics. Al Gore's Current TV, you know, created by people that watch it. Again, this whole notion of that the many people can participate and there is a real value in that is very important. HBO build all their websites around community and social media. And interestingly enough, they have a back-end reporting system that looks at various things. They can identify the 64 most influential people that talk about The Sopranos. Now, I personally wouldn't want to go and have long debates about The Sopranos, but actually, they've learned that if they listen, it adapts the way they write their scripts. It adapts the way that they sort of think about maybe the character developments. Because actually, in terms of network theory, you will get an alpha user in every community, and that person is very, very influential. So if you don't listen to the people talking about your business or your brand, you do so at your peril. But there's going to be some real benefits out of listening. Mini as another site which is equally built around this whole idea that actually it's the users which are generating the conversation and the content. And if you think about it, I would say now that advertising is the content and content is the advertising. Advertising is the conversation and conversation is the advertising. How do we go back to creating great experiences? Now, there's a guy called Peter Reed, and he came up with a theory called Reed's Law. His is the green curve. The first one, red one, is Sarkoff's law, which was actually the whole idea about mass media. So the more TV sets you've got out there, more radios, then the more eyeballs you've got, which is how the whole of the media industry sort of, you know, bases its media spend. We'll get X number of thousand eyeballs around this, and X number of thousand eyeballs around that. The next law is Metcalfe's law, which is all about the internet, and sort of shows that you know, the interconnectivity on the internet actually increases and the reach is much more powerful. Reed's law is all about social networks and group forming networks. So when groups form around something, the impact that that can have is exponential. And that is the power of communities from a real theoretical point of view. I was listening to Bradley Horowitz talk the other day. He's a senior chap at Yahoo. And he talks about a strategy they have called Better Search Through People. So user-generated content that is actually not organised by the editors or by the company, but by the people. And those people distribute it. It's a completely different model. It's where you actually get everyone to become the marketeers for the company, willingly to engage in it. And yes, we reject interruptive communications increasingly. There's X number of studies and reports now that now show that interruption, as we call it in its many forms, is increasingly ineffective in a media splintered world. I wouldn't even say it's fragmented, it's splintered. And it's something that we've become more resistant to. I was talking to Mark Hansen from Lego this morning, and you know, again, we were sort of talking about this whole notion about community engagement, and what he's been doing at Lego is fascinating and really works. But again, if you've grown up, I mean, my daughter says she doesn't watch TV, she's always on two-way flows of communication, whether it's again on her blog or on MySpace or SMS or IM or whatever. She doesn't want to actually live in a world where she's going to be interrupted by stuff. It's almost anathema to me, or to her. So if you think about it, people will expect to have their voice heard, and it's back to this thing about psychological self-determination, that actually I want to have direct influence about the things that mean the most to me. I don't want people trying to force on me things that I don't want to listen to. And one of the things that companies also forget is actually this notion about play, and actually sort of play and experience are really important things. That doesn't matter whether it's a retail space or whether it's in a virtual space or whatever. Creating an experience is very important. Now I want to show you a film. If I can get it. Okay. Have we got any sound? All right. I'll have to talk over it. We have Red Nose Day in the UK. And runs every year, and they created a film with this comedian Peter Kay to promote Red Nose Day. I'm sorry about the sound. Okay, so it goes on, and I don't have time to show you the whole film. Anyway, the next one was a film created by the British Army in Basra as a kind of spoof of that film. The peer-to-peer flows of communication, where people were sending, uploading, downloading this particular film, brought down the servers of the Ministry of Defence. So we embrace the play ethic. If we create attraction, if we create context that people want to engage and be part of and to share, what we have is something far more powerful. We're short on time, so I'm going to carry on. I'll happily send you the film if you want to see the whole thing. So the language of our postmodern culture is about experience. It's about immediacy. It's about collaboration, co-creation, participation. Think about this girl being carried aloft in a big festival. You know, for her, she's got to trust those people to carry her, which again is another important word that brands need to learn about today and mean it. She trusts those people. And even if they're fleetingly a part of passing this lady down 100 yards from where she started, they're all co-creating that experience. And it's fun, and it's great, and it's memorable. And if we think about the etymology of the word communication, where does that come from? Where's the root of communication? Well, it's communion. It's about coming together and transcending together. It's about being part of something. And again, if you think about it, if we are all participating, if we're able to participate in something and create value, that creates a completely different sense of belonging. Glenn Urban said, who's a professor at MIT at the Sloan School there, that the push marketing strategies that suited us so well for the last 50 years are no longer relevant in a time of information empowerment. We need trust-based strategies, and brands and businesses today, they don't need consumers. What they need are advocates. They need people to be prepared to give positive advocacy. And belief. I'm really interested in the idea that brands and businesses of the future are going to be driven by a deeper belief about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if you think about Martin Luther King, if he'd stand up all those years ago and said to people, I have a 5-year plan, as opposed to, I have a dream where I believe that we can take you somewhere, I have an idea and a passion, I don't think all those people would have been standing in those streets listening to what he had to say. In our book, we talk about the 4 C's, which is connectivity, culture, commerce, and community. And I just want to sort of break those down and sort of look at what they mean. Robbie Williams played a concert to 7,500 people live in Germany. That was then broadcast to cinemas around Germany where another 10,000 people watched it. But another 100,000 people watched it on their 3G mobile phones. Commerce and community. I'm sure everyone here knows about the citizen journalist newspaper Oh My News. It's the 3rd largest online paper in Korea. It's considered to be the most influential. When we wrote about it last year, it had 25,000 citizen journalist reporters writing for the paper. It now has 50,000 people. So what we say is that if we can combine connectivity, community, culture and commerce, what we get is something which is a very different socio-economic model, or a new way of marketing, a new way of building businesses. SciWorld is a bit like Habbo Hotel, but it's all part of sort of blogging, and it's a deeply social site, mo-blogging. The amazing statistic is 90% of all Korean teenagers subscribe to SciWorld. 30% of the entire Korean population subscribe to SciWorld. 100,000 MP3 downloads, I think, every day. So if I'm a record company thinking about how am I going to move my back catalogue, what am I going to do? Well, I would start to think about how do we kind of create context for these things where people all of a sudden have an emotional relationship with something and say, well, I'd really like to have that on my iPod. So if we think about the migration of community engagement, we've got to move from cold media into a world of interactivity and participation. We've got to think about this as social media, where we are co-creating, where we create hot media, and where we're attracting. We've got to think about flowability, so that content flows across all platforms. It's about peer-to-peer production. It's about connectivity, and it's moving from a push to pull world. And if we do that, we get deeper engagement. We build a community, and out of that, we will get more positive advocacy. And in many ways, it's simple. You know, provide me with compelling reasons to engage, entertain me, provide me with a rich experience that I want to share with my friends, enable me and inspire me. You know, so the creative challenge is how do we create those things that are engaging enough that people want to be part of? Pop Idol. We've written a paper on this, which we're about to publish very soon. Is it reality TV? Or is it actually something more fundamental at work? Li Yu-chun, who's the lady there who won Supergirl in China, 400 million people voted for her, and her song was downloaded 1 billion times. The Chinese government actually wanted to take the program off air because they realized that democracy had come through the back door in China via a reality TV program called Supergirl. The way they solved it was actually they said, well, what we need to do is we need to sort of, the producer said, we need to keep this on air. You know, we're making a lot of money, you're making a lot of money. So they agreed that actually the final contestants in the final show would sing patriotic songs. But if you look at, you know, whether it's American Idol, in the US, the single biggest texting event in the world at the time, which was amazing when America didn't really have a mobile or texting culture. But the amazing stat for me was that 30% of those people had never sent a text message before. How do you change people's behavior around technology? Okay. I'll jump this because we're running out of time now. To sum up, a brand without a community is like a village, a town, or a city without its inhabitants. And we have an option here. We either engage or we die. Thank you very much.